Lord have mercy, mercy, mercy. Daddy hoping at your party, party, party. Lord of them load. Hospitals, no medication, them load. Them load, them load, them load. Ghetto youths, no jobs, you know them load. Them load, them load, them load. No water to drink in townships, them load. Them load, them load, them load. Lord have mercy, mercy. Me step on top of the rhythm, step on top of the version. Crowd of people come out of them, say that me a champion. When they come in, I did that, make it your girls attention. When it come to me, lyrics, no competition. Them load, them load, them load, them load. They have no sense of purpose, them lose. Them loot, them loot, them loot. The elderly dying without medication. Them loot, them loot, them loot. Them mercy.
Hello everyone and welcome to the launch of a very important and exciting investigative journalism series, the Kleptocracy Project, a series initiated by ZAM magazine, and it's centered around 10 African journalists based in 8 countries around the continent who've been working tirelessly for at least 6 months, delving into examining the world of kleptocracy across the continent, to show how it works, to show its impact on Africa and African people, and to show how grassroots activists are helping to fight the theft and abuses of power. My name is Ikenna Azuike, and tonight I will be your host. And it's my pleasure to introduce a range of expert guests on the subject. We'll be discussing kleptocracy as well as investigative journalism in a broader sense. Okay, before I introduce my first guest, a few housekeeping bits and pieces. Number one, I hope you're all safe and well. Still crazy times, but we're nearly out of it. Well, at least some people are. But stay well. Number two, please join our conversation this evening, okay? This is your opportunity to ask provocative, spiky questions to all of our guests, get the information that you need. You can use the chat function, the chat room function online, or you can head to Twitter and send us questions using the hashtag ZAM Kleptocracy Project. And we have a very special co-host this evening, who I'll introduce you to shortly, who will be collating all of your questions. That's it, in fact. So it's time now to head on to my first guest, and that is a journalist and writer who worked for many years also as a correspondent in Johannesburg. He's the chief editor of ZAM magazine, the initiator of this evening and the series, Bart Luidink. Bart.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Yeah, thank you so much. Glad to be here.
But ZAM is an Amsterdam-based platform, journalistic platform representing African creatives, not just in journalism, but also in other fields, the arts, in design, photography, and so on. Kleptocracy's been happening for a long time. Why did you decide to initiate this project now? Why did ZAM decide to do that?
Yeah, well, the Kleptocracy Project itself, it's running for a couple of years now, but you're very right in saying that it's not today's or yesterday's or not even 2 years ago issue. It's there for a long time, and it's probably one of the most important obstacles, if not the most important obstacles, in the creation of a better Africa, of better African countries, of good governance, of functioning system in those countries, in creating governments that deliver to the people. What's new, however, is, and that's a development over the past few years, that you see this eagerness, this upcoming crowd of African investigative journalists who are eager to dig into those kind of issues and to expose. Yeah. And that's what the project is about.
Yeah, and when we talked about this before, I mean, there are literally, the poster boy of investigative journalism is the Ghanaian reporter Anas, what's his surname?
Anas, Aramaya Anas.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's international, he makes international headlines, so yeah, it's definitely...
Yeah, he's an important example. He's one of many already, or nowadays. And but yeah, he's done an incredible job in exposing all kinds of bad practices in Ghana with huge consequences for the people in power as well.
And how did the Kleptocracy Project actually come about then?
Yeah, it's very much driven by our African colleagues. We're not an organization that tries to think for Africans or for African investigative journalists. As you said in the beginning, we run a network of many hundreds of journalists, investigative journalists, photographers, performing artists, opinion makers, and they're all part of this generation of independently rebellious people who want to change things and to use their skills and their disciplines to feed into activism in the continent, into protest movements, and again get things changed in African countries. And what they told us and what they tell us all the time is that to really prioritize this issue of kleptocracy and to inform international audiences in African countries, we have a following in those countries as well, but also outside the continent, in the Netherlands and anywhere else, to inform them about what's going on in African countries, what ruling people in ruling parties and elites are doing to their countries and why it should stop.
Yeah. You need to look at African Twitter to see how engaged young Africans are, desperate for answers, desperate to speak truth to power. So, yeah, I hope our audience tonight has lots of rebellious types, budding investigative journalists, change makers, and we will hear from you shortly, I hope. Thank you very much, Bart.
You're welcome.
Okay. While we wait for our other guests to join the table, I'm going to introduce you, like I said earlier, to my co-host, Stephanie Duncan Williams. Stephanie, hello.
Good evening, Ikena.
Stephanie is a coordinator at ZAM magazine, and tonight she is going to be collating your comments. Tell me, what are you looking for from our audience tonight, Stephanie?
Well, I'm looking for tons of questions. I want everybody to feel the safety and feel the openness to be able to share and ask questions. Bart already mentioned it. That is what this evening is for. So I hope that we will receive that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a provocative topic. You know, it's not one that's. As a Nigerian Brit myself, you know, it's uncomfortable to have to admit certain truths, but this is your opportunity, everybody, to ask the difficult questions. So make sure you do that. Okay. We're now joined in the studio by two gentlemen. The first is sitting right next to me, and the second is going to be joining me shortly. Ivan Pillay from South Africa. Ivan, hello.
Hi.
I know you said earlier you don't like public events, huh? So I'm sorry for dragging you out here. Okay. Ivan was a leading activist against apartheid in South Africa. And after liberation, he became a prominent corruption fighter as the head of the South African Tax Revenue Service. And we'll be hearing a very personal story from you shortly. And I'm joined on my other side by Dr. Akinyinka Akinyuade.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me, all of us. Born and raised in Nigeria, currently senior researcher at the Africa Studies Center at Leiden University. Thank you both. Dr. Akinyinka, let me start with you. The series, the Kleptocracy Project, I think confirms what a lot of Nigerians probably already knew, and what I feel as though a lot of Nigerians in diaspora are perhaps reluctant to accept, and that is that Nigeria is deeply corrupt still. How did we get here?
Thank you for having me. It's been a difficult trajectory for Nigeria. First was the optimism after independence. But then the oil money came in just after the Civil War, so everything was just buoyant. So Nigerians expected development. Unfortunately, it did not happen as fast as we had thought it would come. Mm-hmm. And in fact, things went downhill in the 80s. All of a sudden, you start hearing people like Fela singing about certain amounts of money that's missing. Mm-hmm. That's in the 70s, and in the 80s, you hear, okay, another $12 billion missing I mean, just disappearing like that. So it has been disappointing, especially when you look at how such monies will have proved very useful for the provision of public services. Simple things like water, simple things like electricity.
So we know it exists, but why? I guess is the question, because the biggest kleptocratic project, I guess, was colonialism. You know, there's a lot of theft of resources, but was it that system that was in place then that was used by new leaders to rinse the country dry of even more money?
The reasons are multifaceted. We could say, yes, some is linked to the colonial legacy, but then, right after independence, maybe about 10 years late in the 60s, Nigeria took the first steps to decolonize itself. I mean, we got political independence and said, okay, yeah, let us change the way we drive from right to left. Let us change from the pound to the naira. Let us adopt a few other things. So there were active steps, actually, at delinking, but it never was smooth because the new set of leaders that came in and the supporting cast adopted certain policies that did not sit well. For instance, when you look at in the 70s, the issue of the companies that were nationalized. This was all over Africa, not just Nigeria. Nationalization of companies, yes, we took over the companies, but we didn't know how to manage. We did not have the capacity to understand the supply chains, the value chains. And appointments were made into several companies, not because of capacity, not because of they could do it, but because of certain other considerations that are a bit local.
So what should have happened then? Because it sounds as though you're saying we tried to do too much too soon, and that is, how does that link to kleptocracy?
Too much too soon. For instance, we went from simple, you see, there is this trajectory of development that's nice, from bare attention to industrial technology, but we moved fast. We wanted to achieve heavy industrial development, and then started setting up companies like the Alaja steel rolling mill, which government sunk billions into, and it's never seen the light of day till today.
So that was used as an opportunity to, okay. But sometimes moving fast doesn't necessarily go hand in hand with kleptocracy, it seems. Let me go to you, Ivan. You were in a very kind of charged period of South African history. You were charged with running the tax service, effectively, part and parcel of making South Africa's biggest success, which was the tax service. Surpassing targets, collecting billions and billions for restructuring and development, and that all happened very quickly. But then the wahala started, the drama started. Talk us through what happened, because it looked as though things were going well.
Yeah. Well, normally we'd say the wheels started to come off when Jacob Zuma became president. So I want to go a little bit further back to say actually the signs of what would come, it already started to appear. And this started to appear at the policy level and at the program level. And I'll come back later why these levels are important.
We only have 7 minutes, I think.
Okay.
So I don't know how much later, but go ahead.
Yeah. And so the arms purchases that I'm sure you've all heard about, and then the BEE deals.
The what deals, sorry?
The BEE deals, the Black Empowerment deals, are the first signs that at a policy level, and at a program level, at a high level, you see the seeds of what is to come. What Jacob Zuma did is actually to put that on steroids. So you then had widespread corrupt activities that reaches the point now where transactions are corrupt. So it's not just at a strategic policy level, at a program level, but it's now at a transactional level. It affects everyday activity.
Okay, just briefly break down what you mean by saying the transaction itself was corrupt.
So it affects your everyday livelihood. It affects your purchase of electricity, your payment of electricity, water, sanitation. It affects the road that you travel on. It affects whether the train is there or not there. So it's another word you can say is now at an operational level. But part of this capture is that, unlike, say, in Nigeria and other places, South Africa is a constitutional democracy. But it has which I don't think you see in other parts of Africa, it has a proportional representation election system, which gives enormous powers to the governing party. What Jacob Zuma did is that he took over the party. He led an alliance of what we call the wounded, people who were alienated by the previous president, took the party, and then he took over the executive. And because you have a list system, which flows from the proportional representation, he packed in the people into the legislature. Okay. So for a while, he could do whatever he wanted to do. Some of us who were obstacles were people that they then targeted.
And you were an obstacle?
I was an obstacle.
Because you were heading up the tax service at the time, and you were doing a good job.
We wanted compliance by everybody, including politicians, and including the friends of politicians.
And what happened? Because I can see a headline that everyone is watching now, that everyone can see now. Taxman's rogue unit ran brothel. Yeah, describe that headline. What's that talking about?
Okay, so what happened is the spreading of dossiers manufactured by the intelligence services and the use of certain parts of the media to create a crisis for the institution. And then on that basis, move in, suspend people, bar them from talking to the media in terms of your suspension, you can't. Bar them from getting any legal fees, which they should have as an employee. And then litigate against them civilly, charge them criminally. I mean, I was charged twice criminally for a period of 5 years. The consequences, of course, is that hundreds of people left the institution also. These are good people, capable people.
Fearful, presumably, of having the same kind of witch hunt against them.
That's right. And it didn't happen only in SARS. It also happened to part of the police force. It happened to the independent inspectorate on the police force, Robert McBride. It happened to Anwar Dramat. So, in fact, we were about a group of 14, 15 people from different institutions. And we were all targeted in the same way, the same pattern.
I mean, it's very finessed, long-term approach to kleptocracy. It seems, it's not, very well thought through.
Yes. I mean, Jacob Zuma is capable of doing that. But there is a part of this that's very important that I want to mention, is that in targeting us and moving us out, they also moved out competent people. Usually people with the technical know-how of the business, people who understood operations management, and people who had been there for some years and understood public administration. So they moved these people out because they wanted to do what they wanted to do, which is loot. So after a while, what happens is that you move the competent people out, and you have layers of incompetency.
Yeah.
Reporting to another layer of incompetence, another layer of incompetence, etc. So what you have now is not just a problem of corruption. You have a problem of corruption and a problem of incompetence. So even if you wished away all the corrupt people tomorrow, it doesn't mean that things are going to come right, that it's going to work right, if there aren't competent people who can make it work.
And is this recognizable in a Nigerian context, do you think?
In two ways it's recognizable. And first, during the military regimes that we had, you could see the president or the head of state appointing at various levels of administration those answerable to him, but not having downward accountability to the people. And in fact, it's on record, one of the presidents in the mid-80s said, look, I'm going to appoint you guys, told military people, I'm going to appoint you guys to certain positions. You can be there for 3 months, and that's it. Eat what you can, and you are only answerable to me. So they had this belief that they can do and undo. And in that way, public services suffered. Translating actually to civilian life, as we call it, we also had the systems which did not even make interactions between the people's work very well. Two policies, for instance, we have the federal character policy, we have the quota system policy, which recognizes or gives power to probably an incompetent person. Not because the person could do it, but because the person represents another sector of Nigeria. We are multi-ethnic, I mean, we realize that. But that was sacrificed at the altar of competency. And as such, when you are appointed into such positions in Nigeria, you're only answerable to the person who appoints you, not to the people you are expected to serve. And so that way, the system through which money is left parastatals, departments, ministries, disappeared easily. And without accountability mechanisms, it was only later, from the 1990s, late 90s or early 2000s, that we had the Economic Financial Crimes Commission that's been trying to do a bit of work at that level, but still, like you mentioned about South Africa, it's so deep in the system that you cannot just wish away corruption overnight, even if you remove certain sets of people.
Some of the people involved literally aren't capable of doing the jobs.
No.
Have you now, both of you, really become more adept at spotting the signs of kleptocracy in practice, or someone really, you know, preparing, laying the land for, okay, right, you know, this is a new scheme? You mentioned a couple of things pre-Zuma, but what are the other signs that kleptocracy is about to flourish somewhere in a new sector? Or?
Yeah, look, the first thing is that I wouldn't look for the signs of kleptocracy, of people stealing or corrupt, because you get into a cycle of he's corrupt, he's not corrupt, I'm corrupt, you're corrupt, and the whole discourse becomes about who's corrupt. I think what we must focus on is, in this institution or that institution, what is the business of this? What is it supposed to produce? What is it supposed to do? And if this is working well, what should it produce? And in order for it to work well, what do I need to put in place to make it work in the first place, considering that some of the stuff is already broken down?
So you're talking about going back to the drawing board?
Well, not necessarily going back absolutely to square one. It is about saying who understands this business. I mean, look, if it's water, you've got to deliver water. What would be the way in that we know that this water agency functions? Okay, people in these areas must have water on a continuous basis, etc. Okay, what does it take to deliver that? We need to put that in place. Okay, if it's not in place, there's something wrong. There's literally and figuratively a leakage. And it may be because people don't know what they're doing. It also may be because of corruption, because of kleptocracy. But it's always, in my view, it's better to focus on what is the business here and bring in people who understand the business. For me, it's always far easier to get rid of somebody because they don't know what they're doing than to find out if this person is corrupt and what he or she stole and where they put the stolen stuff. It's far easier to say, here's a poor performer. Let's get him out. So we've got to get back to the focus on what it is we are supposed to do. As you begin to fix that and you tighten that, people who are corrupt show their hand. Okay? And the thing is that as you take action against these people, your tightening prevents new outbreaks of theft, etc.
Why do you think they will show their hand as you improve the system?
Because what happens is people have got used to a particular lifestyle. When you come in and you say, no, this has got to be done in this way, they have a problem. They already have 2 wives and 3 wives and 3 cars and so on, okay? So then they start to get reckless. So you shake them out of the pattern that they are in. And that you have to concentrate on the business and with an eye on dealing with the corrupt people that manifest.
I feel, though, the picture you paint, I wonder if the public is patient enough to allow for an approach like that.
Well, I actually think this is the only way that it works, because the other way takes even longer. In Nigeria, they've been doing that for years. Each person who hopes to be president accuses the others of corruption. They come in, they do the same thing, and then it goes on. It goes on. That takes far longer.
Dr. Akinyinka, do you agree with that?
Yeah, it takes far longer. And then, like I said, let's focus. So let's have our eye on the ball. And what's the ball here? There are functions to be performed. There are services to be delivered. Take, for instance, buying petrol at the pumps. That's so difficult in Nigeria. Prices rise every time. We have refineries that are not working. Turnaround maintenance has to be done. Budgets are allocated as at when due. But the refineries never work. We import fuel despite having crude oil.
But is there a danger that, sorry, just to interrupt you, that people, Nigerians, have just come to expect that kleptocracy exists, they have to take care of themselves? Because when you go to Lagos, whether you're on Victoria Island, the wealthy area, or in Surulere, more middle-class area, or in more disadvantaged suburbs, people are looking after themselves. They organize their own sewer systems, their own schooling, their own security, their own water. So maybe are people just willing to let it happen?
People are willing to let it happen, unfortunately, not because they wanted initially, but the services, the absence of services has debased the situation. And but there has been a ray of hope, actually. Nigeria has 36 states. A few years back, Lagos State ran into problems. It did not get its intergovernmental transfers from the central government. Then it started actually an accountability system that, look, we are going to source money from within, and we are going to show you your dollar, your tax dollars, that's what they call, your tax dollars work. All of a sudden, street lights that never used to work started to, because the state was the only state in opposition then. Street lights started to function, which is strange. Water started to run. Okay, fine, roads, you could fill potholes. And that stimulated, actually, it woke people up. That, wait a minute, if we do not get intergovernmental transfers from the central for 7 solid years, and we're able to deliver these mega services, then something can happen. All of a sudden, Lagos, that seemed to be an oasis, started affecting neighboring states, little by little. Actually, that was the background of how even the current president got into place. Because there was now this merger that if it could be done in Lagos, 20 million odd people, then I think there's hope for Nigeria. But it's been slow, very slow, like you said. Come to Ocean State, that's what you find. We all source our water and light.
You're nodding in agreement. Are these things that you recognize also in the South African context? Is some signs of progress?
Yeah. Well, just on the Lagos thing, I read about it from an international economist. And he was praising the progress being made in Lagos. And he also mentioned that it was a failure to get funding from national that got them to do things. And apparently it's actually working quite well for at least 2 or 3 periods of governorship. Look, the reality is that no matter how bad the situation is, you will always get islands of functionality. You will get good people trying to do the right things. So we've got to identify them, recognize them. We've got to support them. We've got to help them pull others into the orbit. Now that is a bottom-up approach. Okay. Now, talking about going faster. Now, if you had some help from the top, you then have a top-down and you'll have a bottom-up approach. Then, of course, you can get leverage and things can go much faster. Eventually, if you're looking at a plan for the whole, you've got to look at a top plan and a bottom plan. Then we can move.
Okay, so let's continue that line of thought. It's top and bottom. I give both of you a promotion. President Ivan, congratulations. I'll come to your ceremony soon. President Akinyika, you're president of Nigeria. What are your top 3 priorities then to address kleptocracy?
Okay, the top 3 priorities would be, given what I've said earlier, that it'll be fixing and dealing with corruption at the same time. One is the top-down, a top-down program, which is to try and select between 3 to 5 institutions or areas that we've got to fix. Not more than 5, because we have limited capabilities, and we have a tendency, certainly in South Africa, when we talk about priorities, we want to talk about 20 priorities. It's impossible.
Okay, so what would be your top priority? What would be your, just give me an example.
An example, water and sanitation, electricity, economic reform.
Fine. Okay, that's 3. That's good. Okay, go on.
So that's the top. The bottom one is set up a capacity, usually using retired public servants of good caliber.
Are you creating a job for yourself?
No. Retired professionals. Get them together. And if I talk about South Africa, I'm sure we'll get 500 to 1,000 people together. And amongst these will be engineers, et cetera, accountants, lawyers. Put them into teams and identify these islands and send them to these islands to support, strengthen them, and extend them. So that's the top and the bottom. Then there's something in the middle. In all the government functions, there are cross-cutting functions, and we'll take just 1 or 2 examples. The one obvious one is recruitment into the public service. Fix it. Set up the policies and procedures that'll cut across all, and you fix that as one example. Another example is operations management. So you'll fix that. So that will cut across. So that's the three groupings that I would put things into.
Okay, clear. And your opportunity?
Thanks.
Briefly, because unfortunately we're running out of time.
Yes, my sectors are education.
Okay.
Secondly, transport. Thirdly, electricity. With transport, this is linked to how we ensure that petrol flows at the pumps easily. And that's to ensure that the turnaround maintenance is done. Transport prices affect many things in Nigeria. Electricity drives also the medium-scale enterprises. We're going to fix that.
Okay. So that's the sector?
That's the sector.
Okay, now the fixes.
The fixes. Now, almost similarly, though I will look at elite consensus, looking at what had happened with our experience in Indonesia and parts of Malaysia, there's going to be elite consensus, similar to what you mentioned about the technocrats coming together and ensuring that certain islands of effectiveness work. There are islands, we're going to recognize them, we're going to make them work. The consensus is that, look, guys, you are buying into this. You're not going to steal from it. It will work.
But how do you make that happen? Because that's what everyone's wanted for the last 50, 60 years.
Progressive taxation.
Is that realistic outside of Lagos?
Very realistic.
I mean, taxes mainly collected in Lagos, but Lagos State, but outside.
There are many things you can do with monies collected outside on housing, provision of housing for civil servants. Easy. Housing, food is, easier to do, but provision of housing, you could use that, you can do that to do elite consensus and things will go well, actually to the advantage of the elites. Okay. So top, bottom, that's it. Coming at the middle, well, because there's going to be lateral accountability, because once they see things work, once elites see that their tax that they are paying, they're also managing and it's working, and the bottom see, okay, there's downward accountability, the middle layer becomes easier to tackle.
Okay, so again, maybe you focus on recruitment, getting the right people in.
Getting right people in.
All right, thank you very much. Stephanie, is there activity in the chat room?
There is. There are some things coming in. People have shared a few questions with us, which I want to share with all of you. The first question is the lack of political will by politicians in high positions not the core of the problem? The system works for a certain group of people, and they wish to keep it that way. I do not think that the lack of competency to run public institutions is not the core problem. Ivan touched upon it shortly about the lack of competency, so I would want to direct this question to Ivan to answer. Do you have any response to this?
Yes, I go. Yeah, look, lack of will is a very big issue. But if we are asked the questions, what can we do? How can we go about it? We sort of assume that there's some will to improve them. I haven't reached the stage where I believe that there is no will at all. I think there is some will. And I think in the example given by the doctor in Nigeria, the example of Lagos. Now, in Lagos, in that situation, when I read it, and that's why I smiled when you mentioned it, it came as a surprise to me. Okay, if it is possible in Lagos to begin to see this will and these green shoots, and that when it starts to succeed, it pulls other people in train with it.
Okay, well let's talk about that. In the Lagos context, did that take political will? Paint a picture for us. What does political will look like in practice? Does it mean more summits, more regional summits? Does it mean more transparency, being on Twitter more, I don't know. Describe it to us. What does political will actually look like?
Political will in Lagos at that point in time was quite simple. Well, there is a governor that is elected by the people, but of course invited the technocrats to plug the holes in the taxation system. Let's ensure that our internally generated revenue, there are no leakages.
Okay, so a clear mandate,
is
political will.
Yeah.
That's one aspect of it. Yes. Ivan, give us another aspect of showing real political will.
Well, I think we'll see the will through consistency. Mm-hmm. In all of these things, what you want, whether it's with the politicians or the top civil servants, you want a consistency.
Okay.
And the commitment to do what is necessary. You know when I use the example, and Lagos was part of it, is that wherever, whether it's clinics or police stations or SARS offices or customs offices, in spite of everything, you will find statistically 5 to 10% of those things are very, very well run. Okay. Those people there have a will.
Okay, well, I want to take another question from the audience, but that's clear. Political will, clear mandates, and consistent leadership. What else have we got?
We have another question that has come in, and that has to do with the international community. We are here in Europe having this discussion, and the question is, what can the international community do in support of African activists fighting kleptocracy? What can we do from here?
Doctor, briefly, what can the international community do?
Yeah, a couple of things you can do is to, of course, support projects like this to ensure that the word is out there. It's not just on paper, but ensure that even in the summits, for instance, in European summits, important topics like this are discussed. And secondly, to ensure, because some of the monies that actually we accuse people of stealing actually end up in European banks. Let there be transparency regarding that. Let there be accountability regarding that. When $1 billion, even if $1 million land in that account today, where is it coming from? Let's be sure. Are you manufacturing microphones or what? That this money suddenly comes. So let there be accountability even from the European side. Mm-hmm. And that helps a lot.
Okay, and a final contribution from you, Ivan? What can the international community do in concrete terms?
In concrete terms, yeah. Look, I talk again about the competency. I know the one question, I didn't think there's a competency problem. I really think there is a competency problem. And there is expertise internationally. There are people that are available. I mean, for example, in societies like this, there is a bigger proportion of older people now in these societies. That creates a problem for the 50-year-olds and 60-year-olds. Because there are people even older than them that are still in work. And I think that we can look at older people who have been there, who have done it, who would say, okay, I'll make myself available. Engineers, doctors, accountants, legal people, surveyors, all of this. I will come and do a 3-year stint, a 4-year stint in some of our countries to bring
okay, so
technically.
Yours is the sort of battle cry for the diaspora community to go back to the motherland and help.
But just not the diaspora, but even here, Dutch citizens.
Okay.
I mean, I mean, what I remember in the 70s and 80s, there were scores of Europeans and Americans in Africa, involved in all sorts of projects, in schools, in clinics, in hospitals. We can do that again.
Okay. Thank you very much for offering a few shoots of hope there. And thank you to our audience for asking those questions. Keep them going in to Stephanie.
Exactly. Right? I'm waiting for you to bring them in.
Well done. Thank you very much, both of you. Now, you didn't actually, Ivan didn't actually mention it, but Bell Pottinger is a PR firm that was used by the South African government to kind of come up with a campaign. And as a way of light relief, I used to have a video blog, satirical video blog. So while we say goodbye to our two guests at the moment, and before we welcome our new guests, here's a little sketch that I made relating to this English PR firm that was once hired by Bell Pottinger, by the South African government. PR firm Bell Pottinger has put itself up for sale. It follows a massive loss of clients after its work on a controversial contract in South Africa. The firm's PR campaign was described as hateful and racially divisive. But they'd probably consider that a compliment given the sort of clients they've worked for, like Belarus dictator Alexander Lukashenko, Oscar Pistorius after he was charged with murder, and of course, Horned Beast, Keeper of Hades and Lord of the Flies, Satan. We think hell has a lot of negative connotations these days, so we'd like to highlight its green credentials by pointing out that the fires of hell, which hold the souls of the damned, are in fact carbon neutral. Ethiopian police have stopped pop star Teddy Afro from launching his much-acclaimed album, Ethiopia. His 2005 album was seen as critical of Ethiopia's authorities. But why would a government that many describe as repressive risk more unpopularity by stopping a popular artist making great music? Okay, so you got half of the next story as well, but the key was the Bell Pottinger one. So it's now defunct, I believe. I think they went bankrupt because of all the negative publicity, which is a good thing, I think. Okay. Let's move on to the rest of this evening, and we're shifting focus a little bit from kleptocracy to the impact, the value of investigative journalism on the continent, and to hear about how it's going. I have three fantastic guests. The first is right here with me in the studio. She is an editor at CNN here in Amsterdam. She's originally from Cameroon, a resident in countless countries. She's lived all across the world, and she's worked for a range of African media outlets, and she's also the ex-chief editor of the English language version of the Dutch journalistic platform, The Correspondent. She was that a while ago, and that's where we actually know one another from. Eliza Anyangwe. Welcome.
You said that wrong, but it's okay.
Oh, I tried to say it with such confidence. Like,
you did.
I know this. Tell me, how do you pronounce it?
Anyangwe.
Anyangwe, that's not so different to what I said. Oh, look at this. Attitude at the table. Okay, and joining us virtually, we have an investigative journalist and the coordinator of the African branch of the Global Investigative Journalism Network, Benon Herbert Oluka in Kampala, Uganda. Benon, can you hear me? Are you on mute? The famous three words. Are you on?
Now I am not on mute. Yeah, thank you for having me. It's good to be part of this live cast.
Thank you very much for joining us, Benon. And another one of your colleagues, our colleagues, investigative journalist now working at Africa Uncensored, a Nairobi-based multimedia platform in Nairobi, obviously in Kenya. Joy Kirigia. Joy, hello.
Hi.
Oh, thank you. That's much briefer than Benen's welcome. But thank you for joining us, Joy. And by the way, everybody, Africa Uncensored was the winner of the Kenyan Annual Journalism Excellence Award with a documentary inspired by a story that Joy actually did for ZAM magazine. So we have a prize winner among us as well. Okay, we're going to talk about investigative journalism. Ben, and why don't you start us off? It's in the title of the platform that you work for. Tell us, what does the Global Investigative Journalism Network, what do you do and how are things going?
Yes, thank you, Ikenna. But before I get to that, just allow me a few minutes to congratulate the 10 journalists who have been part of the Kleptocracy Project. I was part of the 2016 or 2017 or thereabout edition of the Kleptocracy Project. I reported from the northern part of Uganda, which was just coming out of a war. And you could see the reach. You know, I went to the remotest places to find the information that we were looking for. You could see how kleptocracy within Uganda were taking advantage of the, instability or the attempt to gain stability in the region to parcel off huge chunks of land to themselves at the expense of locals who had been driven away by the war to go and live in internally displaced persons camps. So you could see that. You could see how in the private sector, in the non-government sector, both local and international non-government organizations, came with impressive programs, but somehow got co-opted into the kind of corruption that was happening at the local level, and they too were not using the money that had been given by foreign funders to do the kind of work that they had promised that they were going to do.
That is great to hear from Benin, but I really would love us to focus on investigative journalism now for this segment, but it's fantastic to hear your contribution as well. Tell me a little bit, please, about the platform that you work for.
Yes, so the Global Investigative Journalism Network is a member-based organization. We have 211 members from 82 countries. We, in Africa, we have 19 members. And what we try to do as a media support organization is to provide resources that, tips, tools, and different kinds of resources that journalists can use to do better investigative journalism.
Okay, I mean, 19 out of 54 is not bad, but there's room for improvement. Why aren't the rest also on board?
Certainly, there's room for improvement. We have, so the members are 19, but the kind of reach we have, we try to serve the entire investigative journalism community in Africa. So those 19 members really support GIJN through, they have voting capacity, they get priority to conferences, and so we expect that when they get back to their countries, there's a ripple effect in the sense that they're able to also have their own workshops where they can support other investigative journalists across their respective countries.
And you mentioned a couple of the things that you offer people, your members, like access to certain conferences and so on. What are the other resources that you make available to members?
So we are able to, for instance, offer regular training, specialized training for journalists. So only this week we were doing training on how to investigate company finances. That's not the kind of training you get quite regularly on the continent. We have a guide that came out today on investigating human trafficking, that kind of thing. We also have a group where we bring together about 207 investigative journalists on the continent in sub-Saharan Africa. So 207 journalists communicating on a day-to-day basis through a WhatsApp group, exchanging notes, exchanging ideas, resource opportunities, it's a vibrant platform where they're able to really connect and know what's going on with investigative journalism from all corners of the continent.
Fantastic. Joy, you're online. Are you a member?
Yes, I am.
Are you happy with is everything Benon has just said, is it true? Are you getting access to all of those things? And are you finding it's very useful? Do you feel you've grown as a journalist?
It's very useful. Those opportunities that that platform is able to provide is something that, we get to learn a lot, get to meet and share the kind of knowledge that we gather as, colleagues and how use that knowledge to be able to tell stories as Africans and do better as Africans and African storytellers. Yeah. So it offers a really great opportunity, and it's great to be around so many African journalists. And when we have these conversations, you get to realize that we are all experiencing similar problems. So let's
zoom in on that. What are the common challenges that you face? And I'd like to also bring Eliza in on this one as well.
So some of the common challenges I think that we have faced, and our previous speakers have also touched on, is we have issues to do with, and it's something that I've seen across, where when it comes to education, when it comes to the health sector, when it comes to the leadership, all these problems is something that I've seen cutting across most of these African countries. And one of the other challenges that we are seeing right now is where there is the issue of trying to control the media. We are seeing so many journalists getting arrested, and it cuts across. It's not just in one specific country. So you hear of Uganda, you hear of Tanzania, you hear of Kenya, where journalists are being arrested because of the kind of stories that they're telling. So these are some of the challenges that we're facing. And when we get to meet and talk and be in such a platform, these are some of the things we discuss and try to see how best do we tell the stories, how best do we push for this change, how best do we make sure that information is out there so that we can be able to live in a continent, or even in our specific countries in the best way possible. So trying to push for that accountability. So that those are some of the challenges that I've seen that are cutting across most of the African countries. Yeah.
And do you think the challenges that Joy describes, do you think those are peculiar to Africa, or do you come across them yourself here in Europe?
Not at all. I was just thinking about this entire conversation and what makes it a particularly African conversation. Because if we talk specifically from the perspective of journalism, I think that temptation is to look at things like the Panama Papers and presume that all European or Western media organizations are plowing that kind of resource into investigative journalism, and they're not. The media landscape in the West is falling apart. The parts of the media that we need the most, which are local media, to hold local institutions to account, because local corruption is also something that we see across Europe. I mean, we're sat in the Netherlands, and there was a benefit scandal here, and the parties that were behind that have been re-elected. And if that was in the context of Africa, we would have a very different conversation about sort of, oh my God, look at this corruption. How is this persistent? Now, of course, there are certain institutions that are more robust, and the media landscape is probably one of those institutions.
So why isn't there enough more support for investigative journalism over here then?
I think that there is. When we look at how journalism is funded, that we could have a very long conversation about this. When you look at how journalism is funded, investigative journalism doesn't always, you're not guaranteed the results when you start. If you send a photographer to stand outside a nightclub to photograph a celebrity, you're guaranteed to take a picture, and you're guaranteed that people will have fleeting interest in that picture, and that might attract advertisers. And if you're going up against Facebook and Google, then you want as many eyeballs as possible. If you're going to plow in resources to see where could money be going, and how is it leaving countries, there is no kind of clear path for that. And of course, people are trying to obscure that information. And so it is hard work, it is long work, it is expensive work to do. And especially the way our societies are run, that disconnect, particularly if you're talking about stories in Africa, there's a complete disconnect. We can just accept that those things happen there. So people are not, there's not that much reward and recognition for those types of stories.
But talking about reward and recognition, when a story does break, at least over here, it's huge news, and there are accolades for the journalists. That what's the case in Uganda, Benin? Is there a lot of recognition for the work that your organization does?
I think
amongst the public and other institutions, I should say.
No, it's still a thankless job. You end up breaking stories, and sometimes you put in so much work, and you're not getting the kind of feedback that you'd expect. You're not seeing people getting concerned, people trying to create, do some kind of activism that puts pressure on those who have been exposed. But those are the kind of challenges that we are trying to make sure that we confront, and then we try to find solutions to them. So if, for instance, a story which could have been done by a local publication in Uganda and would have been a much smaller story, we try to find, to get people to collaborate such that the reach of a story of that nature is much, much wider. If the Ugandan population, for instance, is under so much pressure and they cannot speak up when some of these things go wrong, we should be able to have the international community, for instance, speaking up against some of these wrongs when they're exposed. We should have pressure coming from different corners of the continent and around the world. So that linkage between within the journalist community is helping to amplify what would otherwise have been very, very localized stories, which maybe the local media organization in a particular country would not give the kind of reach that we are now achieving.
Okay, I'd like to talk a bit more about collaboration in just a second. Before I do, though, Joy, I mean, you heard it there. That's your own colleague saying you've got a thankless job. We all know journalists don't get paid a lot. You risk imprisonment. Why do you want to keep being an investigative journalist?
Okay, so for me, I think it's the kind of responsibility that the work gives us. It's such a huge responsibility to be able to tell the kind of stories that we tell. So it's tough that it's not a very well-paying job. But if we're not able to tell these stories, then who is going to tell these stories? So you get the kind of drive that pushes us personally, that pushes me, is because of the kind of responsibility that we have to tell these stories. But also beyond the responsibilities, also the kind of impact some of the stories have.
Can you describe that? Give us an example.
When I'm talking about impact, and I know my colleague has talked about this being a very thankless job. We do stories and sometimes there's no impact. You expose somebody and they're not arrested. Probably they even get promoted, or it's madness. But when I talk about impact, sometimes it doesn't have to be immediate. Sometimes you may do a story this year and the kind of impact that will be gotten from that story will happen probably 5 years from now. So probably we do an election story right now and our election is probably in 2022. We may not get as much impact right now, but by the time we're getting to that particular point, then we start getting the kind of attention that deserves to those stories. So for me, I think what pushes me is the fact that you cannot stop telling these stories because they're important. The responsibility is so huge. We cannot allow, we cannot give up on pushing for change through our storytelling. We cannot avoid...
To play devil's advocate, though, for a second, Joy, I mean, this series is the Kleptocracy Project. There will also be people outside of Africa who say, thanks to this investigative journalism project, you see, Africans are thieves. You know, why we should be cutting our budgets, we shouldn't be supposed to let them deal with themselves. Do you see that as a downside of investigative journalism?
It is a downside, because really the kind of stories we tell when you talk about corruption, we do a corruption story. Now, the next story that you're doing is still on corruption. Nothing has changed. So it becomes, it can be depressing at times, because once you don't get to see change happening, because if we got, like, my country is very notorious when it comes to corruption. But you see, that kind of culture has been enabled because people have not been held accountable. So somebody is accused of being corrupt, and the next thing you see is that person, when, say, for instance, somebody has been accused of being corrupt from this ministry, for instance, Ministry of Health, so the cabinet secretary is a corrupt person. So the next, the action that is taken is that they are moved to another ministry. Nothing is done. So the next time you have to do another story exposing the same people and you have the same issues. So you end up getting, people are frustrated. The audience, the public is frustrated. And that's why we don't even sometimes get the kind of impact that we need, because it's the same story all over again. Because once we tell the stories, we expect change to happen. I mean, we tell the stories and deliver the kind of evidence that we have to the people, the next person now who needs to do the job, arrest these people and do that, but they don't get to do that. So the cycle keeps on repeating itself, and it can be very discouraging. It can be very heartbreaking, and it's sad that no change is seen, but what do? We keep on telling this story in the hope that one day something is going to shift and there's going to be a lot of change. Clear.
Eliza, Benon talked about it a little bit there, collaboration. He was talking about it more in an African context, journalists, peers helping one another. What about international collaboration? You work at an international news agency. Are you collaborating with African investigative journalists?
My organization, more broadly, not so much, and that's probably because, you know, for an organization like CNN, and I can't, you know, speak on in an official capacity, there is so much scrutiny, and so, you know, but I also think that our industry, journalism, encourages journalists to work in a siloed way. You know, people are paid for their byline. They're not paid for kind of everyone who worked on the story and here's how we collaborated. So the team that I run, which is called As Equals, which looks at gender inequality across the world, I've come in to work specifically on collaborative stories and to think about collaborative stories, because we can't keep parachuting across the world and hope to arrive at an understanding of what's really happening. Because I think that if I can touch on what Joy and Benon have said, if journalists work in a silo, we don't catch the whole system, right? And there are incentives that mean that people keep working the way they do. There is no kind of cultural trait in Africa for corruption. There is no gene for it. There are just incentive structures. And those incentive structures, if we look, as I like to say, downstream, like they lead often back to the West. And so there are opportunities, if we are to think outside of the usual ways we define international development reporting or African reporting, and to really think, where do the incentives lie in this system? We will often actually be pointing the fingers back at our own governments. And maybe these are ways to think about collaboration, not just, oh, here's a story about a woman who can't get water at the well in Africa, and then an editor in Europe is thinking, oh, can I publish another one of those? It's actually, the reason she can't get water is that your company has put a dam at the top, and then there's a story to tell.
And what's the impact of that, the kind of broader impact of creating this, these communities of concern, people understanding, the public understanding that, there is a system which maybe starts here in Europe, but really, and, you know, just What is the wider benefit of that?
You know, I think that it is important for us to understand how we sort of live in ecosystems and how all of our lives are kind of connected to each other's. Because if you tell stories in the absence of that, as Joy says, people get tired and frustrated. The more we see that we are interconnected, the more we understand where the levers of change are for my own life. If I'm reading stories in Amsterdam about poverty and corruption in Kenya, I have no idea what to do about that, nor is it really my place. The point of international journalism, I think, is to help you focus on where you've got room for change. Now, the one thing I envy my colleagues on the African continent is that oftentimes when you go back home, the water might not be running, you've been stopped by the police, or any of these things that remind you that your job is in service. Whereas actually here in the West, we can forget that, and we can then say, oh, we don't want to be involved in activism, we're just going to tell a story. But actually, we have to understand that journalism is a service, and if things don't change because of our reporting, then we have to change something, and working collaboratively will remind us often of the things that need to change.
Yeah, beautiful. Yeah, I'm sold. Yeah, Benon?
Could I just chip in there?
Yes.
I think, you know, there is really good collaboration that is coming through between local African and global media organizations. I'll just give a few examples.
Got time for just a couple of examples. Sorry to rush you, Benon, because there's some questions from the audience for you all.
Yes. So the BBC Africa Eye has created, you know, a setup where they work with local journalists in various countries, and using the technology the technology capacities that they have, borrowing from organizations like Bellingcat, which is very good at online investigations, and they are exposing a lot of wrongs that would otherwise have been swept under the carpet. In Cameroon, they were able to get a group of soldiers convicted, I think 4 years after they killed women and children who they said were collaborating with Al-Shabaab. In Mozambique, something similar happened. In Uganda recently, they exposed a police patrol car and police officers who were shooting indiscriminately at people who were going about their business in the center of Kampala, the capital. So those kinds of collaborations where the technology that is not available to African journalists is then brought to help do much, much deeper investigations are the kind of things that are really helping. And then there are, of course, collaborations to do with providing legal support to journalists from organizations like Media Defense in the UK, taking journalists out of Africa if they are, there's a danger to a risk to their lives, their safety. I think Shelter City in the Netherlands helps with that, and Free Press Unlimited. So those kinds of collaborations are making it much, much the capacity of journalists to do their work
to flourish
much better than it was before.
Thank you very much, Benon. Stephanie.
Yes.
Tell us, any questions for our guests?
Yes, we have had some questions coming in. One of the questions is, how can we support African investigative journalists? I think Benon already touched upon it a little bit, that collaborations are taking place. If you can just give us one sentence on how we can help them from here, and then I'll continue to the other two, because we have just a few minutes left.
Okay, I'll point out, I think, 3 things. One is support with education of journalists, such that we can improve the capacity of journalists to do the work that we are doing. 2, of course, better technologies. It doesn't have to be, bringing the technology all the way to Africa. We can work collaboratively while you're there and we are here. And then I think there is the issue of financial support, which is really key. If there is a chance that an organization can support non-profits that do investigative journalism in Africa, that would be welcome, because it will boost the capacity of journalists in so many different ways.
Awesome, thank you so much. Then I have another question. It has to do with accountability. It says the aid industry is currently not accountable to anyone, and there is no effective feedback loop. Market distortion is severe. Could a leaks platform make a difference? Could a leaks platform make a difference? Do we need aid leaks to create more transparency and demand accountability? I know it has come in conversation before that there is no accountability from up towards from up to down. Do you have an answer for us? Do we need aid leaks? Do we need it?
I mean, if you think about the aid industry as a huge, coordinated, very well-funded, sometimes colonial space, absolutely. And of course, we were talking as part of the sort of the framing of this conversation, we didn't really talk to that, but the question of like, what does the aid industry have to do in terms of supporting this? So of course, I think we need to have leaks in any institution where things are opaque. We need to, open the doors wide and see how institutions are run and ask for transparency, whether it's in the non-for-profit sector, which if you're from Cameroon, like I am, NGO is next government official, or if you are working in development organizations in the global north.
All right, I'm just gonna, one last one, and then we have to round up.
Go for it.
Which African countries could be identified as shining examples, good practices in the fight against kleptocracy? Is there something that we can learn from them? To end on a good note.
I'm looking to my colleagues who are reporting on these issues.
I'm worried by your silence.
No, I mean, there are good examples to share. I think the South African example is really a shining light. When the Gupta leaks, which was an investigation that came out of South Africa, started exposing what was going on behind the scenes in the way the Jacob Zuma administration was running its government, it exposed so much, including how up to the presidency, the private individuals were helping determine who should sit in which position in government. That level of exposure helped bring down the Zuma administration. So that is one shining light. You could look at Zimbabwe, where Hopewell Chinono, an investigative journalist, very recently exposed a cartel that involved the Minister of Health, who eventually was sacked from his job, arrested, interdicted, and then eventually he had to leave. The only problem is that then his investigation. Yes?
Sorry, I have to cut you off. Fortunately, you have given us two amazing examples, and I just want to hold the rest for another opportunity. But we have to continue to the rounding up of this session. Unfortunately, the time has gone so fast.
Yeah, if you didn't feel like you had your question fully answered, then reach out on Twitter. Benen's surely on Twitter, as well as everyone else here at the table. So get in touch. Okay, and that's all we've got time for, everyone. To close out the evening, I've invited Bart back to the table. Bart, are you satisfied with what you've heard, how it's gone this evening?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, after weeks of reading those stories that came out of our project that made you shiver, the theft, the thuggery, the cynicism, the ease.
I read like this, I think the people opposite me were wondering what I was reading it for.
Exactly, and the ease with which some of those leaders speak anti-colonial languages, but at the same time continue the practices from those days, enriching themselves. So, but what we hear with the experts here at the table, with our colleagues in Nairobi and Kampala, with the people who did those investigations, is this enormous potential. People that, if I look at the colleagues that did those stories under very difficult circumstances, power cuts, internet connections being down, or internet being down, closed down, sometimes even life-threatening circumstances with which they did their work, it shows this enormous potential. And what I hear in what they are doing, in what our colleagues are doing, is this call to reimagine the way we engage with people and with platforms and with organizations in African countries, to move away from the kind of aid that ends up in the pockets of those in power, or charity kind of initiatives, but have justice. And that's what people are fighting for. And ZAM wants to be a tool for that engagement and wants to organize solidarity. If you want to become part of it, then subscribe to the ZAM newsletter, share the stories, read the stories, share the stories, contact us if you want to join, if you want to get involved, because it could create that kind of solidarity movement that's so much needed. Absolutely.
And today, the first 4 articles are being published out of the possibly 10 or maybe 11 article series.
Exactly. The first 3 articles are actually online on our website now.
Okay, you heard it there, everyone. I hope you've enjoyed yourselves this evening. I certainly feel like educated, and thank you to all of our guests, and thank you to all of you for submitting your questions. Go out there and get in touch with all the organizations you've heard today and sign up to ZAM's news brief. See you again soon.